It's a dream come true standing here now. It's been a long, long way. As you said, it started 2-3 years ago, but before that, I've been working with another co-author of this book, Jürgen Randers, on system dynamics and system thinking for the last 25 years. And now, today, here is the start or launch. We have a little echo. That's interesting, but I will ignore it. Already, we've launched the book in German, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and Spanish, Italian, I think is on its way. And the book is a bestseller in Germany. So hopefully we can do something with spreading this other way of thinking further also in English. What I want to say about use 10 minutes on is what actually did we find? What's novel? And what can you expect over the next decades? And also, specifically, all this fluffy stuff about well-being. Everybody likes well-being, it sounds nice, but how do you measure it? How do you see whether it's quickly changing? And how do you actually intervene in the economic system so we do get a well-being, whether GDP is growing or not? So decoupling well-being from GDP, is that possible? Our main finding is that sustainability, particularly in the way it's been framed in terms of climate and the nature crisis, insufficient. Because whether we are able to change the food system and the energy system really depends on how quickly we're moving the needle on inequality and poverty. We have addressed some shortcomings in conventional economics modeling, the so-called integrated assessment models. And there are 3 main shortcomings in conventional theory, economic theory, that we want to challenge. First, conventional economic theory has no material throughput. They only look at money flows, not material flows. Second, conventional economic theory looks at technological change, the total factor productivity, as manna from heaven. It just comes if you have a free functioning market. So how do we model an active state that implements missions and gives a direction to the economic growth, not just the direction-less economic growth that conventional equilibrium theories expect? So after material flows and active state modeling comes maybe the most important thing, what I will spend the most time on, which is the social dynamic. What about trust? What about institutional stability? And how does this interact with the overall economic development, and particularly the rate of change in those drivers that are pushing the planetary boundaries, pushing us past 1.3 degree and 1.5 degree and so on. So this is what we want to share with you, our findings on here. Did this work? There we go. Now, another novelty of this study is that you've all read reports on energy from the IEA, from the Bloomberg, New Energy Finance, from all the different energy analysts in the world. You probably also read reports from the FAO or the EAT Lancet on the food system. You probably read reports from the UN Development Program on poverty eradication, or the IMF, or you probably read reports from OECD or Piketty on terms of inequality, and lots of reports on how important it is to give education to everybody, particularly women and girls, so that we get gender equity both in education and jobs. So we haven't, come up with any brilliant new silver bullet that will solve everything. Our novelty is really that we see how all those 5 are interlinked. So if you start to pull one lever, how far can you come unless you also move another? Or if you start to pull one, how will that impact on others? How does inequality impact food? How does energy impact poverty? And poverty impact energy? So that's some of the novelties that we are modeling. The scope of the model is that we have divided the world into 10 different regions with very productive assets, different productive assets. So the Indian economy is very different, of course, from the US, which is very different from the Latin American, which is very different from Europe. And each of those 10 regions develop differently depending on their 1980 to 2020 history. And they are independently, but of course interlinked, calculated as we move into the future. Then on the natural world, we're using the planetary boundaries framework, which didn't exist more than 12 years ago. So that's how we're testing to see if we fit within one Earth. And then we have a social module where we look at well-being, public spending, and social capital. Here we go. Everybody likes spaghetti. I don't, there's a famous professor at MIT, he puts it this way. Science shows that showing people science doesn't work. But I can walk you through the spaghetti very briefly. So one is the real planetary boundaries are a function of how much we use compared to how efficiently we use it. That creates emissions and observed environmental damage. So this is the push on the planetary boundaries. Then if you have an active state that can improve regulation and subsidies in targeted areas of the economy, then you can increase the rate of greening. And when you accumulate experience, then the cost of greening comes down. So you have rapid learning curves, which increase the green fraction, which brings down the biodiversity loss. So this is how we implement an active state. And up here, we have a very fascinating loop, which is that if social tension goes up, well-being goes down, people feel they're on the wrong track, trust goes down, and that hampers the rate of public action. So this is not just words. We've quantified this, and we recreate time series from 1980 to 2020 based on it. So what if then we run that model with no levers pulled? So we don't do any more systems change. We just let the model replicate and continue with decision making as usual. So everybody gets together at Climate Week. Everybody speaks about sustainability, but in reality, investments don't change much more than they have. Policies don't change quicker than they have over the last 4 decades. What comes out of that then is this. Do I have to ask for a click? Next. There we go, that's one. Population peaks at 9 billion in 2050, and then slow decline to 7 billion by the end of the year. So this shows from 1980 out here to 2100 here, 6 key variables. This is what we call the too little, too late scenario. And click there, social tensions go up. So if you think there's a lot of social tension now, just wait 10 years. The model calculates that with the decision making as usual, social tensions will go almost double by 2050 before they gradually start to decline. Global warming, the third one there, rise to 2.5 degrees. Inequality, click, worsens to 2060. This is the inequality index, so it goes up. And then poverty is eradicated only in 2080. So we will have 2 more generations who live maybe at $2 or $3 per day, going all the way to 2080 for most of the world. Finally, stopped in 2080, and then average well-being, which is the function of all the others, which started to decline around 2000, will continue going downwards. This is the business cycles that we modeled due to the competition between capital and owners and workers. So the economy, as you know, booms and crashes. Click. What is well-being? In this work, we've been working closely with the Wellbeing Alliance, and we are using 5 dimensions of well-being. When we move beyond GDP to well-being, it's dignity, nature, connection, fairness, and participation. So there you can see how we quantify well-being, taking it from just a vague concept to actually something that can be forecasted or estimated or assessed based on the current development in the systems. Click. There we go. So this is the deep social dynamics in the Earth4All model. We start with inequality, which doesn't really figure much in conventional economic theory, which focuses on efficiency. Click. And with increasing inequality, social trust goes down. And with increasing social trust, the speed of public action would go up. But if social trust goes down, then the speed of public action also goes down. Click. And then if the speed of public action, particularly on addressing such things as inequality in health, education, and incomes, then inequality goes up and social trust goes down, and there you have it. So this is a vicious cycle, and we can turn it into a positive cycle, and that's what our other scenario is about. What if we implement the 5 turnarounds? Click. Oh, and click again, and make a giant leap. So another world is possible. Click. By doing these 5 turnarounds on poverty, inequality, gender equity, transforming the food system, and transitioning to clean energy. What do we get if we pull the levers on all those 5 during this decade of action? Click. We have specified these 5 turnarounds into 15 policy levers that go down to the action level on each of the 10 world's regions. So how quickly can we implement these, and how far does this take us? Click. How do we then get a future? Click. There. Population peaks at 9 billion in 2050s, declines to below 6 billion in 2100, because women choose to have fewer children, on average 2, when they get as much education and jobs and pensions as needed to give them economic security. Social tensions decline from around 2025 as soon as we start to pull the levers. Click. Global warming stays below 2 degrees. Click. Inequality declines from 2025. Poverty eradicated more than 1 generation earlier. And click. And the average, well-being, which is the gray line here, actually goes through the roof. So a world with more well-being within planetary boundaries is possible. And that's the 5 main actions needed to bring us to that world. So click. That's it. Thank you so much. Are you coming up?
Good. Thanks so much, Per Espen. And now we have a short video from, so one of our co-authors on this is Jayati Ghosh, who sends her apologies, she cannot make it today. Jayati Ghosh is a professor at the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Massachusetts, and her work, she's one of the world's leading economists, specifically on poverty. So I'd like to turn over to Jayati.
Recording in progress. Recording in progress. The Earth4All book contains a number of proposals for how to deal with the climate crisis, how to deal with the planetary crisis that we find ourselves in, how to deal with the extremely unequal world that we have generated, and how to ease a transition so that it is not just green but just. These are all eminently doable, but of course they face major political and economic constraints. And these 5 transitions that we have mentioned, these transitions all require sustained, proactive governments working together. Now, the difficulty is that this actually may seem something that can't be done in the current geopolitical environment. After all, we are seeing a situation where the global fragmentation has actually increased not just in economic terms, but in political terms, where countries are unwilling to work together even for the most basic things that affect all of us, and where governments are increasingly disinclined to provide finance, to provide even the basic conditions for the just green transition. So how do we actually come around? How do we resolve this problem? What are the constraints? Well, the first and most important constraint is that of short-termism. We have seen governments across the world react in a most ridiculous way, really, to the massive increase in oil prices that was an immediate result of the Ukraine war. Instead of seeing this as an opportunity for shifting incentives towards more green activities and towards renewable energies, governments, especially in the rich countries, which should know better and can afford to be different, responded by doing everything in their power to somehow contain the oil prices by encouraging more fossil fuel investment, more subsidies for fossil fuel production. This is ridiculous. It encouraged profiteering by the oil companies, but it also meant that they are further emboldened to continue with activities that we know are destroying our planet as we speak. But the other major constraint is that governments across the world remain beholden or basically in the service of large capital. And they persist in putting profits over people even when we know that this is unviable, and it's not just killing people, it's not just destroying lives and livelihoods, but it is actually destroying the planet. Now, why does this happen? It happens because of the greater lobbying power of corporates. It's expressed in many policies which we know are deeply unsustainable and deeply worrying. For example, the continued subsidization of fossil fuels. The IMF estimates direct and indirect subsidies of nearly 6 trillion just in 2020. It's probably gone up now as a result of the Ukraine war. We don't need to do this. We can actually demand that fossil fuels be priced correctly, not through a carbon tax, which would be regressive, but through reduction of these subsidies and transferring those subsidies to green energy and ensuring that green energy becomes affordable across the world. But in addition, there is a basic lack of the access of the technologies that are needed for people across the world. The technologies that we know have been developed with public knowledge and with public resources and with public subsidies are increasingly privatized. And so what should be the knowledge commons has become deeply fragmented and private commercialized knowledge, which is unaffordable for most of the world. So we cannot have a green transition if, in fact, these technologies remain the monopolies of a few private companies. And this is encouraged by a TRIPS regime, which is actively supported by too many governments. We need to ensure that just like we should have done it for the pandemic, we must do for the green transition. The open access to essential technologies which are required as global public goods for the green transition, for the entire range of things that will make the electrification of everything possible and viable and doable. And finally, of course, we do not have the adequate climate finance. Not only that, we have a complete misdirection of private finance continuing to support brown investments, dirty investments in fossil fuel activities. We can do a range of regulatory measures that will make it much more difficult for private finance to follow the market incentives towards fossil fuels. We can demand of private investors that for every dollar they invest in the brown, dirty industries and activities, they must invest $5, $10 in fossil fuel, in green, in renewable. And they must also invest in the activities that will make the transition viable and just for developing countries by ensuring minimal loss of jobs, by ensuring better conditions for those affected by climate change, by ensuring provision for loss and damage and for dealing with the impacts of climate change. Part of it is regulatory, but part of it is also in terms of accessing finance. And we know that developing countries are not getting even a pittance, not even a small fraction of what is required for essential climate finance. This too we can do. We can dramatically increase the provision of special drawing rights, SDR, by the IMF, to provide more financing for climate change, for dealing with it, for coping with loss and damage, and for enabling the mitigation through new technologies. We can do this by telling the countries that are getting SDRs and not using it the G7 countries and a bunch of other countries that have surpluses, to recycle those towards a major investment fund that will engage in global public good investment for the broader good. Because we know that climate change does not respect national boundaries. It doesn't observe passports and visa controls and so on. It is going to affect everyone, and it is affecting everyone. So we really need to think of global cooperation and international measures which can be done, which are feasible, which are available to us now in terms of human knowledge, possible economic organization, and the technologies. So to do this, we really have to create public pressure on our governments. We need mass mobilization of people to counter the obvious mobilization of large capital, which is preventing these things. It can be done, but it requires much more proactive public pressure as well as much more proactive governments.
Thank you very much, Jayati Ghosh. And Jayati is just one of the incredible members of the Transformational Economics Commission that were part of the two intellectual engines for this project. We set up a Transformational Economics Commission and then the system dynamics work, and created like a feedback loop between those intellectual engines to arrive at our conclusions here. Now I'm going to hand over to Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, President of the Club of Rome. As Jayati Ghosh so clearly said, the problem we have is profit before people and planet. How are we going to drive this transformation? How do we turn this around? Sandrine.
I'm not going to do the giant leap onto the platform, not with this. Thank you, Owen, and thank you, Per Espen. So how is it that we actually transition from all the incredible intellectual goods, the system dynamic modeling, the stress testing of our incredible commission, and make this truly a future for all? And yes, I think I'm going to have to do a click as well because the clicker's not working. There we go. What we've done so far is actually released the book in Germany, and as was indicated by Owen, it's fourth on the bestseller nonfiction list. We've also had about 300 different articles, and why is this important? I'm not trying to pat our back here, but the purpose of this entire enterprise was to make sure that we start to widen the audience, to ensure that we actually have an impact on a much broader stakeholder group than the usual suspects. Those 300 articles have been across the globe on all political divides and all incredibly positive. So the importance is we struck a chord. And what we've tried to do in striking that chord in every single presentation that we make is to say this is about a journey. We know that science-based decision-making is not happening. We wouldn't be in the mess that we're in today if it was. The fact is we have to go faster, we have to go further. We've got the proof. We now have to figure out how we convince people to truly make the change and hold so many accountable, both businesses, investors, and governments. Click. We know through the planetary boundaries work that Johan Rockström and others have done that we are truly going beyond the planetary boundaries, that we've surpassed so many of these different areas, that our obsession with growth, with GDP, has been part of the problem, that production and consumption must change, that the way in which we engage with the planetary boundaries must shift immediately. How do we actually do that? Click. The findings from this model and those 5 turnarounds, and as Per Espen so clearly said, do bring some novelty, but not what you would think. There is no silver bullet because we already have known, first at the Club of Rome for the last 50 years, for God's sakes, but then so many others, what the problems are and what some of the potential solutions are, in particular in the area of technology, in particularly in the area of innovation. The issue is how do we start to think about optimization of solutions across the different systems? How do we ensure that we truly do focus on social tipping points first, knowing full well that the environmental tipping points are before us? Because that's what's growing. It's the social distress and therefore the social unrest. It's the fact that poverty and inequality and the lack of empowerment in many countries has also exacerbated the mess that we're in. That food and energy are absolutely a necessity, not only access, but ensuring that they continue to shift in terms of their impact. So the only way in which we can move forward, next slide please, is to bring in these very important turnarounds, but also the policy recommendations that go with them. The fact that actually we have to transform basic income in low-income countries to $50,000 US a year. We have to ensure that wealth distribution truly happens. And this is not about a political state. This is not about an autocratic or communistic type of regime. This is about an egalitarianism, because we all realize that we're as vulnerable as the most vulnerable link. And therefore, as COVID showed us, if we don't think about that, our ass is on the line. That's the truth. Ensuring that the wealthiest 10% have no more than 40% of national income. Transforming then the energy system, and I'm coming from Brussels, even though I have an American accent. Many of our ministers are not here today, and they're not coming this week, because we're in the midst of the greatest crisis we've ever had due to our dependency of gas and oil on an unholy alliance that we've had with Putin for far too long, even though most of our leaders were told already many years ago to shift away from oil and gas. That wasn't brain science. They were even told to look at demand-side management, that we could wean ourselves off Putin's gas if we made the right choices. 10 years ago, then we had the Crimean War, then we had Georgia, then we had the Ukrainian gas crisis, and still the wake-up call was not there. So we have to not only transform our energy systems, but we also need to work with governments to shift immediately to new infrastructure. We need to transform our agriculture. Again, another example of our food crisis that we're having right now, and the sanctions and the impact that we have in Africa, and the growth in poverty in Africa, because once again, trade deficits have pushed us into a situation we are so dependent on exports and imports that we don't even produce our own food anymore. And then we have to transform our gender power balances. Why? Not only because we know that diversity is important in the complexity that we have before us, but that we have to empower women and girls in all countries so that we have a direct impact on population growth. Next slide, please. Per Espen showed you the too little, too late scenarios, and because of the lighting, it's very difficult to see these. So I'm not going to stay too long, just to make one remark. Too little, too late is now. Too little, too late is all of the innovation we already have before us, the solutions that we already have, transforming already our economies to a certain degree, but it's not enough. Next slide, please. The giant leap is where we start to truly show that we are more than just an intelligent species, as Jane Goodall has said, and truly are wise in the way in which we take into consideration all of the solutions that we know we have in that toolbox and implement them. That we actually have governments that are ready to govern, who are ready to service people, planet, and prosperity, not just short-term profits, who are ready to shift the economy away from the over-financialized economy that we have today into an economy that functions for people. Next slide, please. That is what the turnarounds could achieve. Well-being for all, a shift from the current GDP model to a model, an economic model, that takes into consideration indicators that are social, environmental, and economic at the same time, that very much address the 5 turnarounds that we've just indicated, that address the poverty, that shift in terms of also the north-south relationship, ensuring also that in southern countries, or what we call most of the world, that we actually have an economy that services people, where basic income is addressed, where we actually are looking at trade deficits, where we're actually eliminating debt in many of these countries. Next slide, please. That's what the turnarounds can achieve. A well-being economy that services people, planet, and prosperity, that takes into consideration the fact that our economy is broken, that it really, truly does not service people, and that actually it does not ensure that we build resilience to future shocks and stresses. Because as Per Espen said, we will continuously go up in terms of temperature. Those social tipping points will definitely come upon us much faster, much harder, and if we don't have dignity, if we don't have a protection of our natural forces, if we don't have connection, fairness, and also ensure that this is a democracy where participation is enhanced of citizens through citizen assemblies, we will actually not have that well-being that we are striving for across our economies. The well-being index, which we actually very much address in this book and that is so important, demonstrates so clearly that as wealth has gone up, well-being has seriously gone down. Next slide, please. So the next step is to gather broad political support. This is about an economic transformation. And as I've been saying to so many leaders who tell me it's not possible, I say I call bullshit on that, and excuse my language. Why? Because actually there are not many masks here today. But the fact of the matter is that just think about a few months ago when you looked at your neighbor and they were wearing a mask, and your conversation was whether you'd had the third vaccine or not. You cannot tell me that in the last pandemic, we haven't learned what transformation is. That governments weren't able to move capital fast enough, able to actually ensure that their people were serviced by healthcare and hospitals. And it is the ones that failed to do that, it is the ones that failed to collaborate across borders that created the difficulties for so many others. So the fact of the matter is, we can get the political support if we find out what the narrative is that is necessary to enable our political leaders to move forward as brave leaders. We have to work with them. We have to also hold them accountable. This is where we will scale up a major advocacy campaign, where we will create a movement with citizens, with leaders across the globe, to really change that economy, that current economy that is breaking us all, into a well-being economy. Earth4All is truly an Earth for all. And that is why we call this a survival guide for humanity. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sandrine. The Survival Guide for Humanity, this powerful final few words in the first half of this session, where you've heard about the analysis, you've heard about our key conclusions, you've heard it is possible. And this has not been about creating some sort of utopia. This has been about creating resilient societies to deal with the shocks that we know are coming. And so this is the close of the deep dive into Earth4All, and now we're going to start the policy dialogue. So I'm going to invite Sandrine back on stage for the policy to host the policy side.
Great. Thank you, Owen. Okay. So actually, I would very much like to bring up the next speakers. And what we wanted to do was exactly that, to shift into that policy dialogue that is so fundamental. But before we do that, because actually I know, and I'm actually shifting the program a little bit, I know that one of our small island states that's represented here is going to have to leave in about 5 minutes. I would like you to just give a reflection of what you've seen and whether or not you feel that this strikes a chord, and how we can work with the small island states, because you're truly on the front lines of the impacts of climate change. I can just pass you the microphone if you'd like.
No warning whatsoever. Good day, one and all. I can take a little leap. I have pants on. Silveria Jacobs, Prime Minister of St. Martin. 37 square miles shared with the French, Dutch and French, part of the Dutch Kingdom and French Republic. So you would assume we're rich. Not. the case. We are small island developing states. I'm here with my colleague from Curacao, the Prime Minister Gilmar Pisas. And we're here also with the plenipotentiary minister in The Hague, in Washington, of Aruba. So we're the 3 small island developing states in the rich country of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but we are facing the same things as all other small islanders on the front lines of climate change. We produce less than 0.01%, but we face hurricanes. Well, my side of the Caribbean, face hurricanes. We just escaped Fiona, but our partners did not. So that is clear, massive flooding. We all have to take out huge insurances, though it's provided through CRIF, for excessive rainfall, earthquakes, and hurricanes. And they're only going to be triggered if it's in the millions of damage. We have to get loans from our kingdom partner, the richer kingdom partner, to be able to proceed. We're functioning in a deficit. And when you say 15,000 a year, our currency is guilders, and we still have persons collecting 1,500 guilders per month times 12. It's nowhere near $15,000. So finding ways to get where the money is to where it's needed and not burden these tiny countries with loans that they can never repay, and from whence most of the wealth was garnered in the first place, is for us very, very important. So that's why we're here, ensuring that we also have a voice in these discussions. Uncanny that this one is not in the main building, but it is what it is. We're going to get there. I've been to several conferences, and it's also to ensure that our populations understand why these types of engagements are necessary. So indeed, I took several pictures. Hopefully we can actually get the slideshow sent to us digitally so that we can incorporate it. We are striving to get to the SDG goals, but with every disaster we faced, 2017, Hurricanes Irma and Maria, the pandemic, right back to back to back, and you're constantly being pushed back and saying, cut your budget even further, so then you don't help the people. So indeed, transferring this knowledge to the rich countries of the world that are contributing to the majority of the damage that we face from climate change is key to empowering the small man, let's call it that. That's what we call it. And I heard S.G. Gutierrez today, don't want to take up too much of your time, but he also talked about the MVI, the multidimensional aspect of looking at things instead of the GDP. And, you know, debt reduction or debt cancellation and investments being needed and being needed now. So I think it's being said all over, but I'd like to see some action. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prime Minister. And as I will call for a video, but I just want to recognize the small island states because we're so separated from your dilemmas every day, which is this is not just about trying to save the coast, it's saving a country. And it's making sure that you also preserve a civilization, because what we often don't talk about is your ancestors who are buried on that land that some of you are going to have to abandon to go to somewhere else where you're not even welcomed. I think these questions are the social tipping points that we're trying to address here, and very much hope that we'll be able to work with you as we move forward, because it is safeguarding your civilizations and your islands which will demonstrate that actually we've hit the wellbeing economy. So thank you very much. What I'd like to do now is ask Teresa Ribera's video to be placed on. Teresa Ribera is an absolute game changer as the Deputy Prime Minister of Spain. She wanted to be with us, but she is in Spain right now dealing with the energy crisis, and in particular the energy poverty pushback in her own country. And I think she's made the right decision to be there and not be here where the action is. So please, video.
Dear friends and colleagues, it could have been my great pleasure to be with you today to participate in this very important discussion that the permanent representations of Costa Rica and Spain are organizing. So to gather different people talking about a key issue in this year when we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the limits of growth, we understand that we are going towards those limits and experiencing some of their consequences. It is important to explore how much and how fast we need to react. We need to speed up our action. Only 2 weeks ago, the Science Journal reminded us that we are at the brink of reaching some tipping points for our climate system. And at the same time, we have gone through a slab of reality along the last weeks and months in Europe, but in many other places of the world. Heat waves, floods, droughts, something that we would not have experienced before in such an accumulated manner in different parts of the world. And we need to react. We need to react to avoid the worst consequences. We need to fully realize the consequences in the geopolitical context, in the geostrategics of our addiction to fossil fuels. We must change the gears of our system. And here is where the Club of Rome comes with the Earth4All. How we can count on some guidelines, some messages, some clear understanding and knowledge on what to do, when to do, how to react. A recalibrated sense of lens, so to see and to understand the challenges that we are facing, a must read for any policymaker, but also for deciders in the private corporates. How we can value our future, how we can ensure that we do what we need to do, how we understand the message of the Club of Rome, throwing us a lifeline of what we need to do. Some of the most important thinkers, scientists, and economies of the world have tried to identify the two challenges of our generation and how to react to them: the global equity and the healthy planet, where we are and how we need to respond. The imbalances incubated during decades have exploded, and now we see the damage, the losses of the lack of action in the right direction. We need to manage the complexities of these systems being integrated and connected all over the world. How the economic, social, and environmental systems do belong and do relate to each other. How to pace and sequence the moves of the transformation that we need to prioritize. How to organize the action. How to ensure the anticipation and the mitigation of risk. Spain is not an exception regarding the challenges, but also in this global context that we are going through. In our government, we decided in 2018 that we were going to come along with the SDGs agenda, putting the people at the center, understanding that we need to change the paradigm of our premises in the economy and in the social cohesion context, leaving no one behind, addressing the climate challenge, strengthening multilateral action, paying attention to the biodiversity loss and the impact in the day-to-day life of our different citizens, understanding the collateral effects, the side effects of what we do elsewhere in other countries, in our partners, in our neighbors, and in many other fields where different challenges are being faced in a different way. We have not alterated the sense of direction. Even in these difficult circumstances, our bet is still the same. I can proudly say that we are still there. We understand that this is the biggest bet and the biggest commitment we should be undertaking and prioritizing in our action. Even in these difficult circumstances, we understand that decarbonization, the climate security, the social equity, the social fairness are the main lines to take and are the right response both for the recovery challenge after the pandemic and to respond to the energy security in the context of the contingency plans we will be facing the next winter. Some signals along these lines. The first of them, 40% of all our recovery funds are dedicated to climate action, including the transformation of our energy system. But along these lines, we understand that any measure we undertake should be taking into consideration the social cohesion impacts and how it can be that the distributional effects are being taken into consideration. Same when facing the energy crisis. Households, families, the more vulnerable groups, but also the need to modernize our industry, our economy, need to be at the center of our decisions. And this is how we are proceeding to understand the different measures we will be promoting and the measures that we have been promoting up to now. Putting people and the planet first is always the best solution, and still even in difficult circumstances, should be the lines to take for all of us.
Thank you, Teresa. Okay, that's back on. Wonderful. Well, we have a very exciting panel for you now, and I would like to ask for the Minister of Costa Rica to join me, please, as well as Sharon Burrow, and I don't know if Johan Rockstrom has arrived. A few minutes, okay, well, he'll join us afterwards then. And Michelle Griffin. Michelle, are you here? Wonderful. So why don't we have you three sit here, and I'll sit here. Yep. Thank you. Here we go. Yeah, perfect. And Sharon will sit right next to Costa Rica, and Johan can join us when he comes. Does everyone have a microphone? Yes. Wonderful. Okay. So what we wanted to do now was to unpack a little bit some of the findings of Earth4All with you and see what some of your thoughts are, not only reflections on the book, and Sharon, obviously having worked with us on the commission, it'd be nice to see what you think of the final result after all the discussions we've had. Because let's be clear, this has not been an easy feat. I think there are, and you will see in the book, at least 100 different contributors, not only the modelers, but also our Transformational Economics Commission that have esteemed members like Sharon, and many who wanted to join the journey with us as we tried to bring forward some of the thinking, including our funders that were actively involved in the conversations, and some of whom are here in this room. So this was a real joint effort that brought a variety of different people together, some of whom had very different theories of change, to try to see how we could unpack the next phase, understand what that future could look like, bring us on a journey that actually would have some level of potential completion, and enable us then to move forward and bring that excitement out to the rest of the world. That's what this process has been about. We've hit the first two pillars, so the system dynamic modeling and the engagement with the commissioners, these commissioners from across the globe, those thought leaders that brought us some of this stress testing. And now we're moving into the next phase, the movement building, the making sure that we start to have citizen assemblies, recommendations for policymakers. So that's why I'm going to turn to you first, actually. And though it would have been nice to have Yasmin Fouad again, Yasmin from Egypt has been held back in Egypt because of some of the economic issues and food riots that we're seeing also in the streets. So, Christian Guilherme Fernandez, you were the Vice Minister of Multilateral Foreign Affairs, and the geopolitics of this are incredibly important. Costa Rica obviously has also domestically been one of the guiding lights for all of us, deciding to eliminate its defense budget and to focus instead on people, planet, and prosperity. Can you give us some insights of how that's going? How is that project evolving? And maybe some reflections.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I must say that even if the figures that you show us and all the information, the data, probably the first reaction is to be very pessimist. But as we are here, is that we need to be optimistic, and we have the possibility to do a lot of things. Look, but having said that, all the what you said and the result of the study is that if you have investment in education, in health, and you do not change your budget for an army, and you have 30% of your territory protect, and you have the 30% of your oceans protect, you have a very strong environmental policy, we're still facing the same challenge of all the countries. We have all the effects of the climate change, we continue to have the loss of biodiversity, and so on, which is mean This is very important because it's a global problem, even if a small country like Costa Rica were doing the right thing since long time. Now, as probably in the 50s, in 1950s, when Costa Rica decided to abolish the army, we take the first main change in our economy in our country. And now the second revolution that we need to do is to decarbonize our economy. And this is something that we need to do very quick. We already have 99% of the electricity produced and consumed in Costa Rica is produced by renewable means. And this is something very, very strong for a developing country, even if we are a middle-income country. And even having do what I could say the right things, we still have poverty, we still have probably erosion also in the democracy, in the sense that there is corruption. And all the effects of the global situation, and the lack of multilateralism, because for Costa Rica, the defense, our defense is the international law. And the place that we use for defense our sovereignty is the multilateral arena. We are losing now space, and we are losing also fear about the effects of that. We are doing well, we continue in the same path, but we have challenges, very difficult, and that's why the transformation of the economy is a need now. Because the problem is that we are, as a developing country, we are doing things in the right way, but now we are in the middle of the river. And we don't have finance to move to the other side of the river, and probably we are going back to the same place that we move forward. And this is something that we need to make some changes, but this is something that cannot be done only by Costa Rica. It must be a regional or a global approach. And that's why I find this discussion very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love the analogy of the river. And of course, the rushing water is only going to get higher if we continue with climate change. So that is, again, I think one of our very key reflections is that we did not want, as this 50th anniversary report of the Club of Rome, in particular with so many incredible partners, to be shelved. This was not going to be another report that was going to gather dust. This was going to be a series of recommendations that were real-world recommendations to enable you to feel that you have others that you can start to work with. Part of our sense of responsibility is that, absolutely. I know that's also Sharon's sense of responsibility, as Sharon is the Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation, and if you haven't come across this badass woman before, let me tell you, follow her, because she is one of the most powerful leaders that we could ever have asked for, as she has formally declared that actually trade unionism is going to be behind the climate cause, and really given so much time and energy to make sure that on the front lines in your discussions, Sharon, whether it be in a mine or whether it be in a coal plant, that in talking to people they realize that there are no jobs on a dead planet. And I keep on repeating that because it is the perfect reflection, and it is what we need to say to people on the ground. So Sharon, having been part of this process and seeing what we have put in the book, in particular in the recommendations, how can we translate that further and farther in terms of the movement, the trade union movement, but also in particular the employees, and ensuring that this becomes a real social movement?
Well, we actually, first of all, Sandrine, Paris, Till, all of you, I want to say congratulations, because I was reflecting on the fact that if we could have these disparate groups of people, your citizens' assemblies, all around the world, you know, Sandrine and Paris particularly were peacemakers amongst those of us with very different perspectives, and it works. In the end, this is a fantastic product. It is a transformational, you know, pathway to success for people and for planet. and it will build different economic models. No doubt about that. So, first of all, congratulations on being peacemakers and peace builders, but with a vision for the future that is just extraordinary. But I came here to give you hope from people about the world of work and what people want. And because we've not even launched this yet, but we've just finished a poll, Sandrine, that actually says that 66% of people are worried about climate change. We know that, but people are on our side. That's the thing. You couldn't have said that 10 years ago when we were fighting for just transition at the, first in Copenhagen and then in Paris where we achieved it. You know, people didn't want to know. But more than 3 in 4 people, believe workers have a right to know how employers are climate-proofing workplaces. That's your army of people out there, the conversations in the workplace. 46%, almost 50% of people say they would trust their governments more if they planned for a just transition to a zero-carbon future. Now, I just think they are incredibly powerful statistics that show you already have the people. We already have the people. We just have to mobilise them in the way that indeed. And there's something for everybody here. There's the economists and the modelers, but there's also, of course, for the people, a whole range of areas of social justice that actually they can get behind in the cause for a sustainable future where people and planet are at the heart of prosperity. And I wanted to finish this section by saying to the minister that, in fact, there are 2 ministers here. One, of course, is Teresa, who is just a global hero. She's extraordinary. And I've walked those mines that she actually put just transition plans in place with negotiating with the unions in the south of Spain. And it's painful. It's really painful. People are angry, they're hurt, they've built communities, but they also know they've got to build something different for their kids and grandkids. And she has been one of the most courageous people right from the beginning. Before she even was a government member, she backed us in 2 decades ago on just transition. And so this is a woman I love dearly. But I met a young woman in your country, Minister, not too long ago, probably 7 or 8 years, and I employed her because she was running with her parents a family business, and she told me that she had to get out. She had to go and organise people because her parents wouldn't listen to her, that they could sell sustainable products and not plastics in their small business. And so there you go. The young people on in your country don't need to be convinced. They need what Sandrine talked about, which is economic and social stability and hope.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I really appreciate that vision also of the just transition, because that is what this is all about. And there are places that are actually doing it. And what you talk about, and this is where I want to come to you, Michelle, as to how we bring in these stories, in particular the stories on the ground. Because what we've seen from the mining communities, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that most miners know that there needs to be more hope and a better future for the next generation. They just want to hold on to their communities. We need to create jobs where they are. We need to tell them that their communities will continue to thrive, but thrive differently. How do we bring that in to that vision of the future that the Secretary General wants to build for next year? How can we actually shift from the talk shops that the Prime Minister talked about, and many of us, I mean, Jesus, Sharon, you've been involved in all of them. I've been involved in enough. How do we shift from the declarations that mean nothing into the plan for change? Because that's what we put forward 3 years ago as a planetary emergency partnership and plan with Owen Gaffney and with Johan Rockström, real clear calls of action. The Secretary General has been our greatest friend in talking about the climate emergency and the planetary emergency. He has been on the front line. He is showing leadership. The problem is we don't have the followers we need at the speed that we need, because of course there is some of it. So Please give us some insight on how you want to show that summit of the future as being a summit that is totally different from what we've got right now.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Is this working?
It is.
Yep. Okay, great. Thanks so much. I mean, the book sounds great. I can't wait to read it. And uncannily, it's uncanny how much the diagnosis that you're sharing today is kind of captured also in the report of the Secretary General that was issued a year ago. On these same issues called Our Common Agenda, from which the proposal for a Summit of the Future springs. And just to say, I think, I mean, the crux of the proposal for a Summit of the Future is to look not at the what we are trying to achieve, because we already have many existing commitments and agreements that capture the what, whether the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, frankly the UN Charter, if only it would be fulfilled. What we lack in a way is the how, and I think much of what has been exposed here today is precisely the kind of gap between you know, what we know, what we have known for 50 years, even longer, the promises we've made to people, and the fact that we're not delivering on those promises. And so the kind of fundamental aim of the Summit of the Future is to really try to change the how we cooperate at the global level to actually tackle the challenges that are facing us, that are increasingly existential, that no country can tackle alone, that we have the science and data to understand, and that yet we are kind of failing to tackle effectively. So fundamentally, you know, the Secretary General has kind of, as I said, made a diagnosis in the Common Agenda report that really very uncannily echoes what has been said here today with respect to the tipping points we face, the choices we have to make, the fact that these choices are still doable, achievable choices, but that we're running out of time, that business as usual isn't an option, because business as usual is almost a guarantee of continued global shocks that our international systems are not capable of handling. And I mean, if we don't have proof of that from the last couple of years, I don't know what proof looks like. And the SG has also obviously made a couple of proposals for some specific issues that he feels could be included in a Summit of the Future, where he feels existing instruments and commitments aren't maybe fully capturing the ways in which the world has changed. So he has identified things like, well, peace and security, and by the way, the report came out before the events of the last year. Digital cooperation and all of the kind of guardrails we lack with respect to the internet and technological change. Our commitment to future generations and thinking in a more long-term way. Somebody said earlier, cathedral thinking, precisely trying to break out of the kind of short-termism of political decision-making, setting up different mechanisms for how to handle global shocks that are truly beyond any one sector, whether it be health or peace and security, and find ways to come together much more effectively and quickly in the face of global shocks. And fundamentally also more inclusion and participation, and this is to your question, how do we shift multilateralism and international cooperation to a form of collective action that isn't just about governments, who obviously still have an incredibly important role. They are the decision makers, they are the regulators, but they're not the only actors with power to solve these problems. And if we look at COVID and the extent to which scientists and big pharma and many, many other actors needed to be involved in coming up with vaccines and public health solutions, but also socioeconomic solutions. If we look at the impacts of Ukraine and the Black Sea Grain Initiative and the extent to which insurance companies and shipping companies and many, many actors beyond governments need to be involved in solutions. How do we shift international cooperation to recognizing the power that these different actors have and bringing all of these different levers to bear on solutions in a way that is both timely and effective? And then finally, also, how do we make sure that we're listening to people much more effectively? And the Secretary General has been very strong on the fact that we need to be much more inclusive, much more consciously listening to people, to young people, to communities about the problems that they face in their lives, and to in bringing those voices into international decision making, hearing them in the corridors of the UN and elsewhere, and making sure that, you know, people understand that that their governments are working for them, that international cooperation and the UN is working to solve the problems that they feel in their daily lives. Because fundamentally it is, as I think somebody said at the beginning, about trust. And
Yeah.
if people can't trust the institutions that determine their lives and their outcomes, then then all of your worst case scenarios are going to continue to go in the wrong direction.
Absolutely.
And Sandrine, can I just say, and my gratitude to the Secretary General for championing the fact that there must be a new social contract, because when Sandrine and Paris and others outlined what it means to actually go beyond GDP, how to create those economies that are about people and planet, for us, that's exactly what the social contract is. It's about jobs. It's about human and labour rights, so it's decent work. It's about just wages that create a functioning economy, the basic income for those that are, are not in work. There's a sense of universal social protection. We've got no resilience against global shocks when more than 60% of the world's people have no social protection. And it's about equality. Sandrine, I loved if I can just make a joke, I loved your description of why equality with women is important. And it threw me back to probably 20 years ago when I was running a workshop for women in Asia. And I'll never forget that one woman from Singapore said to me, "But Sharon, you realise the fear is all about the 4 C's." And I said, excuse me, you can enlighten me about the 4 C's. It's about women's independence. Car, these were her words, condominium, credit card, and condoms. And there you go. So it is about genuine participation.
Absolutely. And Sharon, I know that you're going to need to leave us. And so I'm going to just ask you a quick question before I come to you, Minister, if I may. We have a year to prepare for the Future Summit. 3 years. Two.
It's
No,
in
that's true.
2024.
Yeah, you're right. 2 years. 2 years. Okay, so we've got 2 years. What can we do differently to make sure that we leverage this opportunity to truly make it meaningful? What would be some of your suggestions? What are some of the key leverage points? And what are you seeing? I mean, we're both in Brussels right now. You're feeling the pain. I'm feeling the pain in the conversations that we have with policymakers in Brussels. This is going to be one of the toughest winters we have ever seen. And actually, the key fear from President von der Leyen is energy poverty turning into an impact on democracy. So how do we turn this, as you were saying? We now need short-term levers to create that long-term systems change. We cannot back out from transformation. We cannot go back into stranded assets or stranded thinking. What are some of the key levers that you see before us?
So trying to find optimism in all of this. First of all, we lost a battle in my own country, and David's sitting there. After we lost the carbon trading scheme, which we lost by 1 vote, I think, David, and where the environment movement, ourselves, I was in Australia as the president of the Australian unions then, and the community built their own negotiations, whether people now think it's a solution or not at that time. But we also set up energy efficiency provisions and financing of quick seed funding for the green initiatives at that point. Now we have to transition all sectors. But I think energy efficiency is absolutely one of them. And we've been working with the IEA to do just that. And I keep challenging them and say, yes, for people that's fine, encourage people to put on another jumper, hand them out, hand them blankets, all the rest of it. But also do it within energy, in industry, because a heat pump doesn't cost very much. Capturing carbon and heat and reusing it is for cogeneration, for indeed circular production in many of the heavy industries now. It's possible.
And more jobs.
And more jobs. I can tell you on the jobs front, I'm a total optimist. For every dollar, euro, unit of currency we invest in renewable energy, for every 10 jobs, there's 5 to 10 in manufacturing. There's actually, if they're good jobs, 30 to 35 in the broader economy. So we have to get through the winter. There is, of course, an understanding that we will have to protect those who are aged and, in hospitals and aged care homes and so on. But what we have to do, Sandrine, is fight like hell to see that energy production that's ramped up from fossil fuels is just that, for 3 to 5 years, just production, not expansion. And I say to everybody, and it's my message to the world, I am really angry with fossil fuel companies because I stood against the divestment movement and said, don't divest. Tell them they have to transition. They got the capex, the assets, the technology. Tell them they have to. And I'm talking like more than a decade ago, and investment conferences hated me for it. But that's the answer. And yet they have done so little. And now they're just seeing price gouging as their future. So we have to fight, on the one hand, to stay the distance on renewables. I spoke to the Secretary General on Saturday. I love him. Like, he is so tough about this. But we have to get that army you're talking about. But we have to give people hope that this is a momentary, like COVID, a transition moment where we have to pull together, but the prize is staying the distance. And that's what Earth4All can do for us. And we have to take it to the communities, talk about it, give people a sense that we can build alternate models of economy where people and planet really do matter.
Thanks so much, Sharon. I think you deserve a round of applause for that. I know. And I know you have to leave, but I will build on that. Thank you so much. So thank you. I wanted then to build on that, Minister, and I very much take your point that you're in the middle of the river. And I wanted to build on some of the statistics that Sharon and I hope, Sharon, you're going to send us that new survey, because we also did similar surveys ourselves through this process, where we found that actually G20 citizens, 74% of those surveyed, basically believe and want a well-being economy. So how do we translate that into a support in Costa Rica? How do we bring also you and New Zealand and Finland and Scotland and Iceland and Wales, the well-being economy governments, together as a force for good, as a force of that vision, as a force demonstrating that actually this is about job creation and ensuring resilience to future shocks and stresses? So what do you need from us to do that?
I was tend to answer finance, but it's not true. No. I think it's not only it's only good practices, but I see a strategy coming from in two ways: a top, bottom, and bottom top. And when I say the top bottom is how here in the United Nations, in the multilateral arena, we can work on that. And probably we need to change the right, because you were talking about implementation, but the right to development, we can change it on the transformation of our economy, because it's exactly what we are talking about. And probably is less controversial for the North, that we still working on that. And then with the decision makers, put that on the agenda, discuss that, having always in our statements, and try to convince other countries what we are doing and how this new approach of a transforming economy is the way that we can really transform our economy for adaptation on climate change, at least for that. Because we cannot forget the elephant in the room, which is peace. And I want to make a call also here. There is a allegory of war now. There is money, billions and billions that we were expecting for adaptation, for transformation in our economies, but Ukraine is receiving billions of billions in weeks for weapons, for a war that never gonna end. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not an expert in military. I'm a Costa Rican. Just, but I don't think that the Ukrainians can win against the Russians. Which is mean the first thing that we need to do in the multilateral arena is to call for peace and to negotiations and to start this crazy thing, because it's also polarizing. And I was listening today the president of Senegal saying we are in a situation now that if they are putting us in a situation that I have to choose. You are my friend or you are my enemy, which is crazy. And that's this. But this is something that we need to start on the top, and then to bring the citizens and to have impact on the citizens. But the other way, the bottom top, is with good histories to make exactly in a small, at the local level, transforming their economy. And I think that this is, I saw the power of a group of women in Costa Rica, in the coastal of the Pacific, that they decide to plant mangrove. There was a business of salt, you know. They cut all the mangrove, and then the town was living in this factory of salt. And then they decide to leave the place because it was not a more business. And then some group of women organize, and they decide to replant
The mangroves.
mangrove. And that's completely changed, not only in their economy, but also in the relation at the social level. Now the women are the entrepreneurs, and the men, I'm talking in Costa Rica, Latin America, and the man, their husband and their son are their employees. and also all the kids are working on that, which is mean the transformation is completely. And we bring Amina Mohammed to this project in Costa Rica. It was
Fabulous.
great, which is mean, I say, on the top
down.
we need to have this on the agenda, probably to change some concepts and to bring closer the transformation economy to a right of development as implemented. This is the way. And you say, we know what we want, but how is transforming the economy? And also to have from the local level the experience, because now I'm talking about this little town, the town besides are learning from them, and they want to do exactly the same. And then we're going to have our whole region with mangroves, which is the best way to fight climate change.
Thank
So
you.
this is
And I
something
think these
concrete.
are such powerful examples, right, Michelle? Now I'm going to ask Johan to join us. Johan, you are tardy now. I hope you have a good excuse. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. Michelle, you wanted to build on
I
that.
wanted to, if I may, just quickly, I
Yes.
don't want to disrupt your script too much, but I would just wanted to say.
No, I'm off script now.
Okay, great. Well, actually, I noticed that already. That's okay. I wanted to pick up on this kind of top-down, bottom-up idea, and also Sharon's point about hope, because I think, in response to your question about what can we do, I do think one of the things we really need to do more of is find those very concrete reasons for hope and point out what is working. I think we live in a moment of so much kind of crisis and doom and gloom and hand-wringing, and the risk is that people actually give up a little bit and feel that there's nothing that they can do, whether in their daily lives or as governments at the kind of top-down decision-making level. And I think, sending messages about what is working, finding the stories about what is working, and helping people understand how those things can be replicated, how we can build on them, how much hope there actually is out there, how much some of these decisions are actually not that difficult in the end if we just have the kind of will and resolve to make them. I think it's something we tried a little bit to do in the Common Agenda report, but maybe not as much as I would have liked. We did manage to tell the story about what would have happened with COVID had it broken out a decade prior, and how many more millions of deaths there would have been if we'd not had actually the innovations that we'd had in the public health space, if we'd not had the science breakthroughs that existed. I mean, there were so many things that actually went right with the response to COVID. But we don't really hear those stories because there were many, many things that went wrong. But I think people need to hear the positive stories, and they need to have those reasons for hope as well. So, I mean, some of what you're doing here, I think, could contribute to that in advance of the summit. Thanks.
Wonderful. So this is perfect for us, Johan, to have our little conversation and build on this, because you and I talk about this all the time. How do we create the reality check that is so important through the planetary boundaries work and everything that you do, and that science-based decision making that we're trying to influence, and yet still ensure that there's a level of hope? And that's what we did trying to do through Earth4All. But maybe you can reflect on that a bit more and bring forward some of your newest thoughts, also discussions that you've been having this week. Because you are Mr. Climate. You are talking about the risks. You are talking about the disasters. And we have seen multiple disasters, not only Pakistan, but the droughts in Europe, etc. So we all need to figure out how we balance the reality so that it doesn't become despair, but it also doesn't become complacent in the way in which we move forward.
No, thanks, Sandrine, and this is the big challenge after all. I mean, the reason why I'm late is that down at Javits Center, Riverside Drive, 200 people are gathering to try and define a plan B if we come too close to irreversible tipping points and need to really turn every stone on quite radical ideas, because we're simply recognizing that we are taking unacceptably large risks. So I mean, the reality is, unfortunately, that I totally agree that we have to have, you know, for every time we increase the volume button on rising, you know, unmanageable, even catastrophic risks, we need to turn up the volume on the pathways to solutions. And unfortunately, or the reality is that for every day that passes that we're not able to bend the curves, that we transgress even further planetary boundaries, that we can today unequivocally draw the conclusion that we are, as you and I have been pushing for years now, Sandra, in a planetary emergency point. We are at risk of destabilizing life support systems and the stability of the whole Earth system. I mean, just 1 week ago, as a contribution into the Earth4All work, actually, we published the latest assessment showing that already at 1.5 degrees Celsius, we are likely pushing several of the tipping point systems across their thresholds. And we're talking about the Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, all the tropical coral reef systems that are livelihoods for, you know, direct livelihoods for 150 million people, but indirectly to 500 million people. I mean, this is in the unacceptable space. So we don't want to go there. We cannot allow that. So we need to accelerate. And that's where the Earth4All is really trying to find the transformation pathways. And I think that the uniqueness of the moment where we gather in New York in 2022 is that for the first time we have almost equal amount of scientific evidence of the risk as we have scientific evidence of the scalability of solutions. It's quite a unique situation to be in. 5 years back, we didn't have that actually. We had, you know, we were not able to say with credibility that you can scale a pathway to a decarbonized world economy by 2050. Today we can say that. The Earth4All, you know, Great Leap transformation shows that these are not fantasy wedges anymore, that we can actually transform the global food system to have more equitable sharing with all citizens in the world, lift people out of hunger, have more healthy food, and return on biodiversity, fresh water, nitrogen, phosphorus, and land. That's quite remarkable, actually. So it's the question is, how do we unleash that new narrative, and how do we get the investments going so that we start scaling? I think that's the big question. But in all that, to close, I'm of the view, at least, that we really need to get the diagnosis has to be transparently shared in an honest way with the entire world. That the risk pattern has to be really set out, and then trigger the solutions from that point. And I think the great leap scenarios try to do that. And I should just remind everyone, because I recognize that not all of you have read the book in full, and there's so much work behind that, but one should remember that even with the giant leap scenario, where we're putting all these 5 breakthroughs and really putting all the best ideas we have to full implementation, we're still just holding the 2 degrees Celsius boundary. We're just holding the biodiversity boundary. We're not really putting us back on nitrogen, to be honest. It's So it's just to remember that it's not a small, these are not small challenges we're facing. So of course, I think it's a question of calibrating this together, honesty and solutions and hope in that space, but without coming into this tendency, which I feel some places in the rooms here in New York now, that we spend a little bit too much time on just having this kind of feel-good discussions. And that's not very helpful. We need to, we have a problem, and let's solve it.
I so agree, and I think we need to be optimistic, but we need to be realists as well, and move forward. And it will get painful. It will get harder before it gets better. But what a challenge. It's the greatest challenge that we've ever had in the 21st century. And the question is, can we stand up to the plate? Can we actually meet that challenge? What I would want to do now is maybe open up to a few questions. And I see that there's one in the back. So I'll take a few and have a discussion between us and then close. So I don't know if there's an extra microphone for the person in the back. Yes, we can. And you're representing?
I'm the chair of the Science Summit at UNGA 77. And I'd just like to ask the panelists, do they think that policy making in the, as we would call it in democracy as we know it, is becoming dysfunctional?
Mm-hmm.
There was a reference there to evidence-based policy making, and everybody thinks this is a great idea, you see? But you walk into Congress, they can't agree on the time of day. Mm-hmm. So, and also scientific evidence for policy making produced by the scientific community is almost becoming unfashionable. And so that's not working in my view. So how then is the enabling policy environment going to happen? When is it going to happen? Is it this year? Is it 10 years? Because again, I repeat, I see it becoming dysfunctional. And that is why, in my view, the UN, in my view, rightly, is moving ahead or moving, if you like, beyond nation states and trying to engage at as it were, a community level. I think this is vitally, vitally important. But again, communities can't legislate. Communities can't regulate. And the other point in relation to this as well, and again, I'm here because I'm a big fan of the UN system, but there was an allusion to it a couple of minutes ago in terms of what the UN is proposing. But I would just in particular like to point to the wonderfully eloquent narrative that the Secretary General put forward in his report on the roadmap for digital cooperation. Absolutely terrific, in my view. But the implementation of the recommendations in that, I think it's zero. I think it's zero. Maybe I'm being rhetorical there, but, and when you look at the challenges, again, it's a wonderfully, and I don't think anyone else, any other institution except the UN could advance this concept model. So totally brilliant, but how is it going to be implemented? So then by extension, how are we going to address this, the challenges we're looking at today? And I think the UN is the only forum that can do that, but I think the implementation, as you, Madam Chairman, have just alluded to, is the implementation of doing. How is that going to happen? Thank you.
Fabulous. That was a brilliant question, and I'm so glad you asked it. So I have a few thoughts, but I'm also going to turn to, maybe I'll just answer in a few ways first, and then turn to those that would like to reflect on that question. The first is that my friend Frank is here in the room, and we've started Beyond Bretton Woods. And although I agree with you that the UN system needs to be absolutely a part of the solution, I think the Bretton Woods are dust. I think we need to totally rethink our international system. I think there are better ways to govern it, but unfortunately we have to deal with the system we have for the moment because the crisis is so extreme. But that does mean that we need to look at different leverage points. We have an unbelievable leader here in the UN. We absolutely do. And so the interrelationship between not only the UN, but also the MDBs, the way in which the international institutions are involved in this game-changing moment is fundamental. That's why we've asked for special drawing rights. That's why we've started to talk about cancellation of debt. That's why we think that the IMF and the World Bank have to step up to the plate and do things differently and work with countries on the ground so that those stress points, those social tipping points are not so extreme because they're basically choking and that they are able to truly start to transition. That's part of it, but that's not the only part. You're absolutely right, and I'm going to let you first, Johan, because we do have this discussion all the time, and having just sat actually on the taxonomy working group in the European Union, where 2.5 years of decision-making on deciding what investment is green turned into a greenwashing exercise because of the politics around nuclear and gas, when originally we very clearly indicated that gas and nuclear should not be, from an environmental perspective, that's why nuclear was kept out, not because of greenhouse gas emissions, but environmental criteria, should not be labeled as green. So you're right. The science-based decision-making was there, 2.5 years of expertise, thrown out the window because of geopolitics between France in particular and Germany, and France and Macron not wanting to lose the election to Le Pen because she would have used the nuclear card. That's the reality that we're faced against. We have to be one step ahead. We have to be much more strategic. That means you need a balance of multilateralism, a balance of strong leadership, and also citizen engagement to hold leaders accountable. What do you think, Johan?
Yeah, so I mean, to make things very concrete here, I mean, there are two targets, scientifically defined targets, that we need to meet. And number one is to cut global emissions by half in 8 years' time. And number two is to halt the loss of biodiversity and intact nature down to zero in 8 years' time. So these are the two charges on, let's say, on the sustainability agenda. We're not even addressing peace and equity and justice and wealth distribution. So how to accomplish that in a fossil fuel-driven world where we are just continuing emitting, continuing investing in coal, and continuing to lose nature? Well, my view is that, number one, we need policy. I mean, it cannot be done through this naive belief in just bottom-up community, business, city alone type. I mean, all these are really important, and they have to be encouraged and supported, but you have to have some real top-down policy decisions. And just as you emphasize, it has to be about regulatory decisions. It has to be legislation. And I'm of the view that we've done a big mistake moving from the Kyoto Protocol type logic, where we had legally binding Annex 1 targets for the rich countries, into this bottom-up voluntary NDC mechanisms in the Paris Agreement. It doesn't work, or at least it hasn't worked so far. So how do we reintroduce elements of legislation and regulatory means? 3 countries in the world have done this: the UK, Germany, and Sweden. Here you have parliamentarily laws, climate laws, that irrespective of who wins elections, they're going to be at zero by 2045. I think we need to see much more of that. And because we only have 8 years, we cannot redo the Bretton Woods institutions. I'm sorry, it's just a bit too short timeline. I'd love if we could. I mean, I'm also a big fan of the UN, by the way. But it's just a question of how do we work within this obsolete machinery and still succeed, while at the same time start the transformation towards a new governance regime. And that would be the magic. But of course, the Global Futures Conference will solve all that for us.
Absolutely. Minister.
Thank you. It's a very interesting discussion, but also, to be very honest, the democracies in the world are less and less, which is and it's a global problem. In the majority of countries in the world, you don't need to go through the parliamentarians. and which is this is possible, and they are part also of the UN, and also I want to be very realistic, and it's a shame that the colleagues from Curacao and Saint Martin, they leave, because if you go down those countries, the climate change and the threats of the problems of their own economies, everybody, all the inhabitants of those countries are completely convinced about the threats and the challenges that are facing. And when she took the floor, what she said, she was saying, we are borrowing money, and then we have a catastrophe, and we need to continue to pay, and then when we pay, we have to borrow again. Which is is a reality of a need of a transformation of the economy. Which is I'm a very good fan also from the UN. I made all my life in diplomacy and multilateral affairs. But I think that this finally, I'm very sad to say that, but the democracy, there is an erosion of the economies. And in my region, in Latin America, we see more and more that in the 70s, the change of government was by a coup d'etat. Now they arrive by elections. And because the people are looking for authoritarianism, because they want that the people have the possibility to say there is a problem on climate change on the coast, okay, we're going to do that, and they don't want to ask anybody. Which is mean, there is a room also that if we take some decisions in the top, and also in, I don't know, for instance, Pakistan. What happened in Pakistan last week, I know that all the country now is aware of the effects of the climate change. Which means is an opportunity also to change the normative and to make changes.
And the fact actually that the country has admitted that this is a climate effect is quite phenomenal. Yes. Here's a microphone, and please introduce yourself.
Henry Swan. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Henry Swan. I'm part of Tech Innovation Lab at Stanford Research Park. And my question is, what's your take on a UN, or if you wish, contributing to solving UN SDG through by leveraging startup innovation? Because right now the problem is globally, and there's no lack of problem, is policy, financial system, and commercial system, they're all entangled. And regardless what's intention, they're very slow to move, period. Global economy last year was like 100 trillion, roughly. The whole ESG movement combined is about 3% of that, which is nothing. And that's
ESG is being
and
criticized.
that's just a win, but very little action. Well, if you look at startup innovation, it's on the ground, make it happen today. I'll give you a very short example and stop. One approach actually working right now, I don't want to go to the confidential part, is within the state of New York, how you reduce pollution. Okay, here's one simple use case. We pick the Manhattan. We pick the car, moving around. Okay? And here's how you solve it today. Technology is already available. 1, synchronize traffic light. 2, add the GPS within a car so people can find free parking versus paid parking. 3, which is actually, some politicians here laugh at it, make the car, every time you stop the car, within 30 seconds the engine will turn off, which is today ridiculous, all this bus track running non-stop. We run a model, scientific model. These 3 steps could be deployed within 6 months, and it will bring the pollution in Manhattan by up to 30%, and it will cost nothing.
Yeah.
And then the answer like, oh wait a minute, what is the policy angle for this? Like, doesn't exist. Remove it because we don't need you. Actually, we can use this, and we start talking and then few, Ford, Toyota at least, and perhaps Honda. As a car manufacturer, are you open to deploy this? Would be more than happy to deploy.
Thank you.
So my point is link innovation to the commercial, because that's root cause of everything. Back to you.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to have to close, but I'm going to respond because actually you've just hit something that I know very well. And I'm going to answer that 20 years ago, I was part of the auto oil program where those solutions were actually the most cost-effective solutions that were put forward to the European Union. And what happened? We did a very good job. We reduced emissions. We reduced our fuel quality, or improved our fuel quality, but we focused on those rather than technical shifts that we saw already through traffic management and efficiencies within urban centers. That was 20 years ago. We can talk about ZEV vehicles in California. We can talk about so much of this technology. You're absolutely right. We can bring that technology in. We can bring that innovation in right away. What happens is self-interested companies who are actually not providing those technologies often block the progress. And that is the biggest issue that we have to confront. So it's both that plus the policy that would actually enable it to go much faster. But you're absolutely right. We have to ensure that real innovation that services people, planet, and prosperity are introduced as soon as possible. That's the response also to digitalization. Digitalization, and I grew up in Palo Alto, I know Stanford very well. Go to San Francisco, and I know my staff want me to shut up on this point because I keep on pointing to San Francisco. Talk about the lack of trickle-down. We've got people, the worst homeless situation we've ever had, the most amount of drug addicts, the highest house prices we've ever seen, and yet we've got the wealthiest innovators who are sitting there watching while their city is going down in smoke. That is the disconnect between the social, the innovation, and exactly what we're trying to say in Earth4All. Earth4All is about bringing this back to people's lives and livelihoods and ensuring that we live within the planetary boundaries so that we thrive, not only survive. And I'm going to conclude on that, and I'm going to wish you all a good day because we can do this. Please speak to your friends about this movement. Please purchase a book outside. And please come back to us and let us know whether you actually want to join us so that we can all be on this journey and it's not as lonely as it has been until we got here. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for coming, and we really do want to be involved with what you're doing. Please tell us how we can do that. So.